Welcome to our third Fall Women's Leadership Forum titled How Women Rise. Break the 12 habits holding you back from your next raise, promotion, or job. I'm Dr. Susan Madsen, founding director of the Utah Women in Leadership Project and also the Karen Haight Huntsman Endowed Professor of Leadership in the John M. Huntsman School of Business at Utah State University. And I'm the host and will be the moderator today. This event furthers the mission of the Utah Women in Leadership Project, which is to strengthen the impact of Utah girls and women. And we serve Utah and its residents by first, producing relevant, trustworthy, and applicable research. Second, creating and gathering valuable resources. And third, convening trainings and events that inform, inspire, and ignite growth and change for all Utahns. And I would like to thank our sponsors up front, the Utah Education Network, the John M. Huntsman School of Business, and USU Extension for making this event possible. So I'm just so pleased to have Sally Helgesen with us today. Sally has been cited in Forbes as the world's premier expert on women's leadership. She's an internationally best-selling author, speaker, and leadership coach. She has been ranked number 6 among the world's top 30 leadership thinkers by global gurus and chosen as the Thinkers 50 100 Coaches, world's top coach for women leaders. Sally's most recent book, How Women Rise, is what we'll be discussing today. And this book became a top seller in the field within a week of publication. That's amazing, Sally. And rights have been sold in 17 languages. She's got a number of previous books, including The Female Advantage, Women's Ways of Leadership. By the way, I've read all Sally's previous books as well. And that book was hailed as a classic in its field and continuously printed since 1990. And then another book, The Female Vision, also the subtitle is Women's Real Power at Work, which explores how women's strategic insights can strengthen their careers. And then also The Web of Inclusion, and a new architecture building great organizations, for building great organizations. And that was cited in the Wall Street Journal as one of the best books on leadership of all time, and is credited with the bringing the language of inclusion actually into business. In addition to her established coaching and consulting practices, Sally delivers leadership workshops and keynotes for companies and associations around the world. And she's a contributing editor for Strategy Plus Business magazine and a member of the 100 Coaches Network and the New York and International Women's Forums, and she lives in New York. So for those listening, you're welcome to put questions into the Q&A. You can put some comments if you'd like into the chat. I'll be looking at those through, but if you have formal questions, and we'll have time to do Q&A, put those specifically in the Q&A. Throughout the presentation today, and I'll be watching, and then I'll pose questions throughout. So today, Sally and I decided to have a conversation. Instead of having her share slides and PowerPoints, she's got a busy schedule, and her and I have met before and stayed in touch for the last number of years. And so I'm going to ask her, we're going to have a conversation, and I'm excited about that. Thanks for joining us today, Sally.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here. And Utah's a state I just love and haven't been basically pretty much anywhere during the pandemic, and eager to get back to Utah at some point.
Oh, thank you so much. So first, of course, I just gave the bio. So you've written numerous books on women's leadership. What motivated you specifically to write this one? And how is this one unique compared to the others that you've written?
What motivated me to write it was my co-author on this book, Marshall Goldsmith, had written a big international bestseller called What Got You Here Won't Get You There, published in 2010, which is about the habits and behaviors most likely to get in the way of successful people and hold them back as they move into leadership positions. It was based on his many, many decades as a top executive coach. And I thought Marshall's fundamental insight was brilliant. And that was that the same habits and behaviors that can serve you well early in your career can hold you back as you seek to move into leadership. Yet you remain loyal to them because you recognize that they've gotten you where you are. However, in reading Marshall's book and in trying to adapt it to some of the workshops I was doing, what I realized was, not surprisingly, given his very heavily male-dominated coaching base, that a lot of the habits that he talked about didn't especially relate to women. You know, he had like learn to apologize, which is not a problem for most women who often can't stop apologizing.
That is true.
Don't stop always talking about how great you are. Things like that, again, not much of a problem for women. But that a lot of habits that I'd seen over my 30 years of working with women leaders and aspiring women leaders all around the world were not in there. So I suggested to Marshall, a longtime colleague, that we collaborate on a book that took that idea, that insight, but applied it specifically to women. So How Women Rise is the result of that. And it's been quite a journey since that book was published.
I forgot I was going to hold up the book for you, Sally, so people
Thank
can
you.
see it.
Yeah.
This is what it looks like. Oh, that's great. That's a great background, because there really are differences. I mean, sometimes people, in years past, we've said, let's try and be gender blind. Well, that doesn't really work. There are differences, right?
Yeah, there are. And, people say, well, is it nature, nurture? I don't know. I'm not, a sociobiologist, but I do know that women have many different experiences often in the workplace than men do, and that shapes them in terms of their contributions, in terms of their leadership, in terms of their communication style. So, and certainly one thing, of course, we want to say is none of this applies to all women, just like what Marshall talks about does not apply to all men.
Absolutely. So in the book, you really talk about women defining success a little bit differently than men. Talk more about that.
In my experience, and I've been aware of this for, at least a decade, probably more, that women tend to define success based upon their experience and their ability to contribute. They want to make a difference in the world, and they also want to have a day-to-day experience that is, not always, of course, it's the world we live in, but a day-to-day experience that's relatively satisfying. They want to feel some degree of balance and harmony in their life, and they want to feel as if they're using their talents to their full potential. Men definitely tend to want to feel that they're using their talents to their full potential, but they are often more willing to overlook a miserable job if the money and position look good for them. I've had this discussion many times with Marshall and with other coaches, with leadership experts like probably our mutual friend, Henry Mintzberg, and they all agree with that. So women are less likely to just accept, okay, my life is miserable, but I'm making a lot of money, so who cares?
That deeper purpose is so important. And I just want to add something. In my 2017 book, a scholarly book it's the Handbook of Research on Gender and Leadership, one of the chapters, some authors from the UK did a study on the difference between success and ambition and what women and men want differently. And men define success and their ambition really, I use my hands and I do this like a career ladder, boom, 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 boom. And women, I do this up and out, because yes, that career ladder, but if they're not successful at their family or their community work or their contribution, I don't know, it's not as meaningful maybe. So tell us more about what you call the problem with stuckness.
Yes.
You talked about that in one of your chapters.
Sure. Stuckness in the book, I define that as you're frustrated in terms of the contribution you're able to make. You're frustrated in terms of where you are in your career. You feel to some degree stuck. You're not maybe getting the promotions that you would expect. You're not maybe developing the connections that would be helpful to you. And you're not exactly sure why. So you have an awareness of a barrier that's often an internal barrier, but you're having a difficult time identifying it. And you have an intuition that you may need to do things to some degree differently, but you're not sure how or what that would look like, or you're kind of afraid, like most of us, to try something really new, so that you collaborate in keeping yourself in a position that is not either really fulfilling or doesn't put you on the path to something that would be really fulfilling.
So I'm wondering, because you co-wrote this book with Marshall, did he have different perspectives from, with men, or was there anything different there?
Well, we went back and forth. I mean, he had some of the habits in the book that I suggested that I saw as internal barriers to women. He was shocked by. He still says every time, he said that habit you had about putting your job before your career, he said, I never heard of it. I never thought of it. That really revolutionized the way that I think about how people contribute. Other things like the perfection trap or building rather than leveraging relationships, he had a lot of insight into that. So it was a great collaboration. I'm a writer. Marshall, usually when he writes his books, he works with a writer. So we didn't have an issue about that. I was always going to be the person writing it. But we talked through pretty much everything in the book. Many of the stories were mine because I'd been working with women for 30 years, but he provided a lot of overviews and especially a lot of how to address it. The tactical, what do you do when you identify this? So I think that's one of the reasons the book has been so successful and so resonant in very, very different cultures, is because it's very tactical and how to, it doesn't just identify problems, but it gives lots of advice for how to address them. And part of that orientation comes from his 40 years as a coach.
Yeah. Oh, wow. And in all of your years, I think the combination of the two, what a powerful book. And it has been so successful. And so you have this caught my attention. I've read this book a couple of times. Why did you have a full chapter on, it's titled When Women Resist Change? Like, do women resist change? Yeah, I think so. But tell me about how you decided to have a full chapter on that and why.
Susan, it's because, first of all, once you identify stuckness as a problem, and then you realize that you may be resisting making changes that would help get you unstuck, it's really good to know what's at work inside yourself that's keeping you from making changes that would be helpful. And this was a part where Marshall and I definitely really collaborated, because in talking it through, what we began to recognize is that everybody resists change. I mean, that's why they're coaches. That's why people will pay insane sums to someone like Marshall to coach them, because it's hard to change and you need someone to hold you accountable. But what we realized from comparing our experiences is that women and men sometimes resist change in different ways. According to Marshall, from his experience, typically men will, something will be brought to their attention, or at least this is the men he's worked with, something will be brought to their attention. And their first thought is, oh, that person must be confused, or they don't understand what I'm doing, or, they don't get it, something like that. And then they may think about it and reflect about it. And often, he said, the outcome is they're dismissive of that person and like, what a jerk, basically that's the response. So they resist change because they will often develop a negative view of the person who's given them their thoughts. Whereas women, when they get any suggestions about how to do something differently, tend to, in my experience, take it very much to heart, and can often then feel bad about it, or feel not so much take it personally, but take it very seriously, like, oh, I must be doing this, and what am I going to do? I'm terrible, or,
And rumination kicks
the
in.
rumination kicks off. Why does this happen to me? Oh, I'll never get there. So women will process, before they process it, will take off the time to feel bad. And then when they process it, it will begin to make sense to them. So although women and men resist change in different ways, we came to the conclusion, again, based on a combined probably 75 years of experience in this field, that women are actually more proactive at making changes and more amenable to making changes often than men are. So that's why I wanted to have a chapter when women resist change to highlight some of those differences, because I think that they indeed work to the advantage of women.
And as you well know, in my work as well, the more that women are aware of all of these things, aware of how we might react differently to change or whatever the issue is, it just is a light bulb sometimes, and the whole, what you said, the research is so supportive of women typically, well, men, if something happens, they get, they blame outward, and women blame inward.
Inward, exactly. Yeah.
So I did want to, and we have some questions popping up, but I'm going to stop in just a minute, just so you know, everyone that's listening in, that I'm going to take a break in just a minute and ask some of the questions, and then we'll get back to some of my questions, and then I'll grab some of your questions. So thanks again for joining us. So do you get pushback, Sally, in your work, that some people will call, and I have from time to time, there's kind of two different camps, and some people are all in one or all in the other, and that is the fix the women. And so this book would in some ways fit over into that fix the women. Any leadership development programs, and I do a lot of those, or helping women get more confidence or any of those things, some people will call, and it's in my book as well, Fix the Women, and they lean in, Sandberg's book is kind of the fix the women versus why aren't we fixing the systems and the processes and the systemic issues. So do you ever get pushback on that? And what are some of your
thoughts? From the day the book was published, are you kidding? Second radio show I did on the pub date, I got that quite strongly, and I've gotten it, when I've sat on panels, and it's a legitimate question. It's very legitimate. I feel like I have some leeway because I've spent 30 years writing about women's leadership strengths. And it doesn't escape my notice, by the way, that I've spent 30 years, I've written 8 books. I've written a lot about women's leadership strengths, their vision, their capacity to build strong relationships. But I have to wait until I write a book about women's internal barriers and what gets in their own way before it becomes an international bestseller. So that has not escaped my notice. But yes, I understand that. And to some extent, I have a lot of sympathy with that point of view. However, changing our own behaviors is something that lies within our control. For most of us, we are not in a position to change the culture or the structure of the organizations that we're a part of. And the only way we will probably have a strong chance to do that is getting into positions of more authority and influence. So to the extent that internal barriers hold us back from achieving those kinds of positions, I think it's very important to address them, because that is a way in which the culture and structure will change. And we've seen that, I've witnessed that in organizations over the many decades where I've been working with women. So I'm a big, you're in Utah, so one of the things that really has stuck with me for the 25 years since I read it was Stephen Covey and that 7 Habits book, talking about your circle of concern and your circle of control, and that you want to match those. And if your circle of concern, if you're concerned about a lot of things that you can't control, you will be less effective. And the more you focus on what you can control, what lies within your circle of control, the more effective you will be. So this is my attempt to say, hey, here's some things that may be getting in our way that we can start to work on tomorrow. So let's get on it, and then we'll have a chance to expand that circle of concern.
I love that. It's so true. And one of the ways that I respond is it's not or. The work on women's leadership and gender equity, you've got to have everything moving along at the same time. So yes, you support efforts in your organization and look at unconscious biases as systemic issues, but that doesn't mean we don't want to work and be better ourselves as women and get more confidence and understand who we are and all the things that you do all the time, Sally, in your executive coaching practice and your writing as well. So I love that response. I want to go to a couple of questions. The first one is, do you have, and by the way, after I do these questions, for you listeners, I'm going to then dive into, Sally and I aren't going to be able to do every chapter, all the 12 habits. We're going to just pick and choose. And if you have the book in front of you, you can look at some others that maybe we don't and see if you have questions around those. But here's a question. So do you have advice for female leaders, already leaders, that suffer from imposter syndrome or the imposter phenomenon? How do you coach people around that?
I coach people around that in two different ways. It's very important in my view, and I don't think this point of view is articulated enough, to distinguish whether you have what I call the benign imposter syndrome or a problematic imposter syndrome. And a benign imposter syndrome is simply the discomfort and slight feelings of fraudulence that most of us feel when we're doing something new, something where we don't really have the expertise yet. We're outside our comfort zone. We're a little uncomfortable. We're doing something differently. So for many of us, that can make us feel like we're an imposter, or people will find out that we're not really an expert at this. Well, guess what? Half the time it's a brand new job and people know you're not an expert. You're only expert at the job you've been doing for a while. So to me, that's a benign imposter syndrome. And I would love to give it a more positive name, because I think it's really just an awareness of your own discomfort. So there's a degree of appropriate humility that can help you to learn. So that's sort of what I think of as benign imposter syndrome, which is not a problem in my view. A more problematic imposter syndrome, I think, is the result of perfectionism, and very tied to that seventh habit in the book, the perfection trap, where you either feel that you are doing everything perfectly at all times in every circumstances, or you're a failure. It can be anything from, landing a client to, did you overbake the cookies? I mean, whatever it is, you want to do it perfectly. And when you don't, when you fail to be the perfect human being, then sometimes the imposter syndrome can really kick in and you feel like you're a fraud because you are not perfect. So it exacerbates the pain of that perfection trap, because not only are you not perfect, but guess what? You're also a total fraud and an imposter. So I think it would really be helpful, because most of us do feel a bit fraudulent when we're doing something that's new. And it's good to just get used to that and think, well, I'll fake it till I make it. It can be a very helpful approach.
I like how you separate those two, just being out of our comfort zone, doing something new. Of course, most of us, feel like we're not quite ready. We're not quite ready, but I like that separation. And I think, as you know, I've done so much work on raising girls to be leaders, that background, and some of that really does come from the way you're socialized. We know that girls, the research in elementary school, that girls are socialized so much to be perfect, to be quiet, to keep their mouth shut, to raise their hands and those kinds of things. So it is interesting. But we're all different as women too, right?
We are, but I do also want to say that organizations tend to encourage perfectionism in women as well. So it's not just how we're raised, but we have research that shows that women tend to be rewarded and promoted in organizations based on their being precise and correct in what they do. Whereas men are more likely to be rewarded and promoted based on the perception that they're big picture thinkers, or on the connections they have, or on their visibility. So those are very different criteria. So women continually get the message early in the midpoint of their career, being precise and correct is what's going to get you where you want
on
to go.
what they've done versus their potential. Men are more, oh, I see,
Yeah.
this in the future. I love that. Let me grab one more question. Just any quick tips. This is probably addressed throughout the book if I'm remembering, but any quick tips on developing confidence? That is something that that many women struggle with, most in some areas. Any tips on that?
In terms of developing confidence, I think three things are really helpful. One is you don't need to wait until you feel fully confident in order to work on conveying confidence. So again, we go back to this, don't take the imposter syndrome too seriously. So you are allowed to pretend that you are confident when you're not feeling confident. And you usually do that through some body language or through the tone of your voice. I remember about 25 years ago, I was new to a group of consultants and thought leaders, and it was mostly men, and there were some real hotshots in there, very, very well-known, powerful men. And, I kind of, I was somewhat young, not terribly young, but some of these guys were older than I was. And I kind of was on the fringes, and I felt like, I had to wait for them to say anything to me, or, I'm not important enough or whatever. And one evening at a kind of cocktail party, I decided there were four of them standing who were, sort of the ones who were most intimidating to me. So I thought, I'm just going to go up and stand there as if I belong there. I'm just going to go up and stand, but I'm going to really stand. I'm not going to, kind of sidle up and hi. No, I'm just going to stand like, hey, I'm here. And I did. And I ended up saying almost nothing. And but they acknowledged me. But I felt so empowered that evening just from standing there like I belonged. And what I took away from it, and I've used this with a lot of clients, what I took away from it is pretending that you feel an absolute right to inhabit a space where you're feeling a little awkward about it. It can be very empowering when you just do it in a physical way. And that's pretty much how I did it at that moment. So I think that is a very good thing. You don't need to feel fully confident before you act fully confident. It's like smiling. If you're unhappy and you start smiling, suddenly you feel better. Our body gets that signal. Oh, hey, I must be confident. So that's a very good thing to do. And then enlist support about it. Let people know I'm kind of struggling to feel confident in this situation. Do you have any thoughts? Can you give me support in the room, etc.? That's also very good.
And Sally, isn't it so interesting when you read the research, how all the topics that you've talked about thus far and we'll get to are all kind of integrated. I mean, the confidence with the stuckness, with the change, with perfectionism, there's all kind of connected in some way. They're not separate.
But that confidence, that lack of confidence, because and that feeling of I'm not ready for this or whatever, there is the positive side of that is a humility, and that humility is what enables us to, I would suggest, make change more easily, especially than men who've had lots and lots of success and lots of confirmation of their own fabulousness through life. Then, it can be very tough for them to change.
Yeah, that's good. And we look at humility. I mean, oftentimes people think humility is being small, but humility is just being teachable. And that goes with exactly what you were saying. Thank you for that. I'm going to jump back to my question. So now in the book, you have 12 habits.
Yes.
So which one is your favorite? I know you like them all, Sally, but which one is your favorite? And talk about that.
They change over time, and
Oh.
it's in response to my audiences and what seems to resonate most with them, because I used to do so much in-person work, but now I'm on do a lot of Zoom programs with companies primarily, and I'm able to go all over the world and hear all kinds of responses. So the habits that get the most sort of endorsement broadly, one of them is that number 2, expecting others to spontaneously notice and value your contributions. I think that is very powerful and very important, and I've gotten more attached to it as time has gone on. Putting your job before your career, very important habit. And also, I think building rather than leveraging relationships, because that's something that I struggled with in my career, and I see so many women do as well. So right now, those 3 are my favorites.
So let's have you talk about that middle one, because that's intriguing. It's intriguing for me, but I'm trying to remember. It's been a couple months since I reread it, but I'm sure if people have not read your book and are getting it, they're like, what is that?
Building rather than leveraging relationships. Going back to the female advantage.
No, the other one, the job career.
Oh, job versus career. Oh, okay. Yeah. Putting your job before your career. So putting your job before your career is when you invest all your energy in doing as good a job as possible in the job you have, in the belief that if you are the best at the job you have, if you pour yourself into the job you have, you will be promoted, or it will lead you to where you want to go. But this is often not true. It often doesn't get you where you want to go. And then somebody else gets the job and you think, wait a minute, he or she, I did a better job than they did, and I'm not quite sure why they got the promotion. And this is usually 2 things. First of all, we forget that every job is a job, but it's also a bridge. So as we are in that job, we want to be thinking about where this could lead, and we want to be open to that, and we want to be taking actions that can position us for where we ultimately want to go, so that we're identifying ourselves as that. The other thing we often forget there is, and this is something from my own experience, I will say, I've come to believe that every great career is built on 3 legs. And one is expertise, and that's the talent you have and the extent to which you develop those talents, which is what you do when you invest heavily in your job. But the other 2 are your connections and your visibility, your ability to get known for doing the job you're doing and get known widely. And
that's
if you're
hard for women, right?
Very hard. But if you're overly invested in the job you're doing, then you often neglect that visibility. And that's why someone else may get chosen, because they had put more effort into their connections or into their visibility. So we need to recognize that it's important to do that. We need to think about where we want to go. We need to talk about where we want to go so that people will hear us. Because what I've seen is that if we pour everything into the job we have, first of all we're doing is showing we're perfect for the job we have.
That's true. That's true.
Exactly. That's what we're demonstrating. We can also make ourselves indispensable to our boss or to our team. And I've worked with women where this has happened. I remember a woman I worked with in Boston in a tech company, and her boss said to her, you are so, you are just superb. And, I considered recommending you for this other position, but I realized I can't afford to lose you. And she said she felt really good about that at first. And then she thought, so does that mean I'm never going anywhere? So when a job came available she really wanted, she walked into his office and said, I would love to get this job. Can you help me? And she thought he was going to say, of course I can't help you. I told you you're indispensable. But, he lived in the real world and he'd gotten somewhere himself. And he said, of course I'd help you. You've been so good. And so he helped her. And she was so surprised at his reaction. So we need to talk about it. We need to make clear what we're doing. And we don't want to get stuck so that we are just identified as the perfect person for our job and make ourselves indispensable.
And we're so socialized to be humble again and not to put ourselves out there and be more visible. Yet we know that we have to do that, right? I mean, we have to.
It's our responsibility, really. And I'm going to say in a minute why it's important, but that's why I think the foundational habit in this book really is expecting others to spontaneously notice and value our contributions. We're reluctant to talk about them. We're reluctant to claim our achievements. We're reluctant to talk about where we want to go next because we might be perceived of as arrogant or disloyal. So the way we work, the passive strategy we develop is expecting others to notice what we're doing and speak for us without us even asking them to. And it often doesn't work. And it's even less successful in a virtual world because people really don't know what you're doing. So
that's true.
We need to advocate in that way. And here's why it's so important, because I've seen this happen so many times. If you just expect others to notice and you don't find a way that you are comfortable with to bring visibility to your contributions, you will, over time, you'll come to feel under-recognized. Yeah. You'll come to feel undervalued, and over time you will disengage. Even if it's a job that's wonderful for you, you will begin to disengage because we can't remain engaged if we feel chronically undervalued. So that's why we have a responsibility to avoid that happening.
That's such a good point. And I'm doing a lot of work on the wage gap right now, the gender wage gap. And even with those, when women know that they're being underpaid, that can kind of lead you into the feeling undervalued and disengaging as well. So someone has quickly asked, you mentioned the 3 legs. Yeah. Mention what those 3 were one more time.
Sure. Expertise, that's what, the talent we have and how well we employ it. Visibility and connections.
Connection. Okay, great. So I know you already talked about perfectionism. However, here in Utah, that's a hot topic. Women tend to be more perfectionistic than men, but in our culture, we call it the Utah culture. In our culture, we really have seen evidence, some people have done some research that we are even, at least some of us, even more perfectionistic. And talk about that. I mean, why is that a problem? I mean, tell us more. And that's your habit 7, right?
Yeah, the perfection trap, I call it. Perfectionism is generally for women not a problem at an early or middle stage in their career. Where perfectionism becomes problematic, even toxic, is as you move into a higher level. And there are a couple reasons. One is, as you move to a higher level, you need to delegate. And if you're a perfectionist, it's very difficult to delegate because you are, by definition, expecting other people to do it perfectly. And that's tough. So perfectionists often end up doing other people's work because they say, well, at least I know it'll be done right. And then that's a problem for them, but it's also a problem for the other people because they don't get the support and training that they need to be able to do their job. So that's not a good trait as a leader, not being able to delegate. Secondly, you identify yourself as having a micro focus. Now, at senior levels, organizations are not looking for people who have a micro focus or who are focused on being precise and correct. They're looking for people who they can identify more as big picture thinkers. And women have fantastic big picture thinking capabilities. partly because of their, ability to notice so much of what's going on. That's great skill, but they're often identified as micromanagers because of that focus on precise and correct. So you are sort of branding yourself as not a potential leader by your perfectionism. So that it's a problem there. But then it's also a problem in terms of the amount of stress you create. And that becomes much more problematic when you're at a higher level. You create stress for yourself because you're always falling short.
Yes.
And we're human beings. We're not perfect. So you create that stress for yourself. You create stress for other people. And I say this every time I speak. I've been doing this work, this phase of my career for 32 years, never once heard anyone say, I work for a perfectionistic boss and I love it. People do not love working for a perfectionist. Guess what? I've also never heard anyone say, my mother was a perfectionist and I loved that. And one thing about perfectionism, like another habit that's toxic at the top here, the disease to please, is if we're perfectionistic at work, we're probably perfectionistic at home as well. So we have double the stress, double the anxiety, and double the ripple effect on other people.
So how do you coach? Give me a few ideas. How do you coach women who really are perfectionists in that way that you talked about that really is holding them back?
This is probably the hardest of the habits in the book to really work with, but it's certainly possible. One thing that's good to do is to set time limits on what you do, because as perfectionists, and I know this as a writer, I can spend a week on a paragraph. And so I have to set time limits for myself because otherwise I spend the whole time trying to perfect that one paragraph. So setting time limits is very helpful. Forcing ourselves to delegate, even when we're unsure, with the idea that our goal is not to make sure the product of that other person is perfect, but to help them learn to do the work. So you're more in process there rather than focused on the outcome, because perfectionists tend to focus everything on the outcome rather than the process, than a healthy process. Thirdly, it's really good to always ask yourself on anything you're doing, to what degree does this need to be done exactly right? Is it 90%? Is it 85%? Is it 75%? Don't even put 100% in there, because given the reality, especially of how we work today, if we put 100% into one thing, then something else is not going to get underserved. So we want to get in the habit of making an assessment on everything, of the degree of completeness, or I don't want to use the word perfection, so I'd say completeness or accuracy or whatever that rubric is, to how much does this need to be that way? And by the way, if we work for someone who's a perfectionist, it's very helpful to always ask them that question, how much does this need to be? Because if we give this 95%, then we've got, X, Y, and Z, and they may get underinvested in. So I'm interested in your perspective about the relative importance of this in terms of how I'll allocate my time on this. So you're bringing them to some degree into reality.
That's great. That's a great suggestion. I wanted to pull us back just a little bit to that visibility conversation that we just had, because there's been a couple of questions come in on that. And one question is to bring it to real practice, is what are a few tactics that you might use, especially as a woman, to bring visibility to your contributions that won't, you have to be, you and I know the research on this, you have to be careful as women. You can't do things exactly like men do. So what are a few?
Okay, first of all, I think it's very helpful for women to, when they talk about what they've done, their achievements, et cetera, to use the language of contribution. To talk about, I was able to contribute doing this to this effort. to also think of what they do, of what they contribute as information that can be valuable to somebody else, because then they know what you're doing, what you've contributed. So rather than thinking of it as bragging, thinking of it as information that might be helpful to your boss or to whoever, your colleagues, your team, in understanding, what's going on, that it's information, it's not bragging. But the language of contribution is really helpful. And using the language of contribution can also be helpful if one of the things that often holds women back, and understandably, is that they recognize that a lot of work is done in teams.
Yes.
So I get that question a lot. Most of this work is done in teams. If I talk about what I did, isn't that taking away from my team? So Susan, it goes back to it's not an either or. It's not an either or. I always say, our team was able to succeed beyond expectations with this client for, these 3 reasons. The contribution I was able to make was X, just so that you always want to make sure that you speak about what your contribution is. The final thing I'll say about that is a kind of larger point, and that goes to, we are often more concerned with what the other person might potentially think of us if we talk about what we've contributed than we are with the importance of conveying what we've contributed. We get focused on, and I'll tell you, the most common question I get is, how can I be sure that, how can I talk about what I've done without anyone thinking I'm arrogant or all about me or, not a team player? You probably can't. There probably will be someone somewhere who is uncomfortable with that. But your job is finding out the best way of conveying what you've contributed from an information point of view, because it serves your visibility, for all those reasons, because you don't want to become disengaged. And that's more important than making sure that every single person thinks you're a wonderful person, because that's not really what your concern is. So we often get overly involved in managing other people's perceptions of us.
That is great. I was thinking while you were saying that, offering your contribution, so much of what we do, and I know I'll give you an example of what I do. I do lots of research for Utah, but I'm always offering that to people when they ask me a question or say, I'm struggling with this. Have you seen the research my team and I did, or something I wrote an editorial that might help you? Is that what you're talking about? Or
Absolutely. That might help you. That might be helpful. This might be something that will help you understand. So you're not saying, well, I happen to write a piece about whatever. You're putting it in the framework of how this can be helpful to the other person. But it's important to know that, that this was something that you were able to work on. And, very interesting question you raise here. I was part of a research team that was able to find an answer to that. Here's one of the main things we found. One of the interviews I did showed that, etc. So you're putting yourself in there, but you're not pretending you did all the work of your team. And often women, I've had so many women over decades say to me, if I have to be like that jerk around the hall to get noticed around here, no, thank you. Because they're taking the most extreme example of somebody who's very self-serving and positioning himself and acting like it's either that or, just not saying anything. And as you say, it's not either or. There's a lot of room in between.
Yeah, I think these are good examples. Hopefully this conversation, I know a couple of you have put in notes about this, and hopefully those examples are helpful. One of our attendees of this event she says, I have a hard time, when I read the book, I had a hard time getting my head around the habit too much. Can you dig into that a little bit?
Oh, sure. Too much is basically too much background, too many ideas, too much disclosure, too many words, too much information. And this is a habit, you know, as I say in the book, research shows that in the United States, women tend to use 20,000 words a day and men tend to use 7. So in organizations where there are a lot of
7,000, not
men,
just 7.
there's what?
7,000, not just
Yeah.
7.
Oh yeah, no,
Not just
7,000. Well, except in the Midwest where I'm from, 7 would
Oh.
sort of do it. But you know, what are you doing? Working. But yeah, women tend to talk more, basically, is what we're saying here. And sometimes in our zest to convey all the details and all the background, that can be actually what I've learned is it can be kind of confusing to men, like, where is she going with this? What, you know, what is the point here? So I've seen women, I've done it myself, you know, let me tell you the background of how I got to this idea. Whereas a lot of guys, it's just like, what's the idea? You know, why are you telling me the background? Whereas, you know, if you're talking to another woman, often, you know, that conversation about how you came up with the idea is very compelling. So in an organization or in a professional situation where you're dealing with a more, you know, bottom line or, you know, get to the bottom line type of culture, it's always good to think about how concise am I being in my presentation. Try to limit the number of words. Something I found very effective. Don't start with background. Say, you know, here are my 3 points of what I found. If you're interested in the background of how I came to that, let me know. Glad to tell you. So you're giving them sort of the choice or the option as opposed to bearing them with a lot of information. And, you know, my thinking about this, as noted in the book, was really spurred a lot by a woman I worked with at a major pharmaceutical company who was the highest ranking woman in operations. And I asked her, I said, what is responsible for your success here, do you think? And she said, it's because I'm so concise. She said, we have a very male tone here. The senior men have an extremely short attention span. She said, I was a physician in private practice for 20 years. I had to get used to conveying very complex and often life or death information to people in that short window that the insurance companies give us. So I got very good at being concise and direct, she said. And I think that my male colleagues appreciated that a lot. She said something that was fascinating to me too. She said, so now I do a lot of coaching with the women in the company to try to be prepared to be very concise when they're talking in these situations, because it really, that conciseness in a lot of organizations is seen as a leadership behavior, being very clear, whereas being prolix is not seen as a leadership behavior. And she said she sees situations, you know, the famous situation where a woman says something in a meeting, no one notices, then a guy says it, everybody goes, oh, what a great idea. She said in her experience, she's seen that happen. Sometimes the guy is just summarizing it in a very brief way so that his other male colleagues understand what she said.
Oh, that's interesting.
I know.
And I know it shifts for different audience. It might be appropriate at other times to do that. I wanted to just share a quick thing. So 20 plus years ago, when I was defending my dissertation back in the day, my advisor made me go through a practice session, and there were some people in the room. And after a few questions, he knew me pretty well, but after a few questions, he did this with his hand. And I'm like, what are you doing? He's like, you are so good, but then you just need to shut your mouth. And and I've learned how to do media and TV and radio and quick radio spots. And in my mind, I still picture, you're done, Madsen. You're done. Just shut your mouth.
You know, that's fantastic, because that's just one of those little tiny reminders that is so important and helpful in changing any habit or behavior.
Yeah.
So I do the same thing. I'm going to adapt this. I'm going to go, Sally.
So it was his cue when I went to defend a couple times. I just saw him go like that. Like, you're so good, but stop. Just stop what you're saying right there while it's still good.
And Susan, you bring up something so important, because I look at too much as one of the easiest habits, along with minimizing, because what you can do is you can say to a colleague, and this works virtually as well, usually if there's, display for visibility, I'm working on being more concise. I've had feedback, or I've recognized that I need to be a little more concise in my presentations. Would you watch me in this next meeting? And, if you think that I'm going on too long, would you just give me a little signal? I mean, it could be this, though
Maybe not this.
all over Utah, there may be women going like this after this event, but could you give me a signal, or could you just let me know afterwards? I think at that point you went on, because I'm really working on it. So then you go in with the awareness that that person is looking at you to be concise. So that's going to be a prompt in itself, but those prompts are really helpful.
But then it also, I do a lot of teaching and workshops around how to give and receive feedback. That is also a sign to people that you're open to feedback and you want to, which helps you go in the direction of change, right? So
That's
I
right.
wanted to, before I ask you, and I'm looking at our time, we're already an hour in, and
Wow.
we've got 15 more minutes, but I've got so many questions, but I wanted to take just a minute to mention somebody's comment. It's not really a question, but she said, this book has redirected the course of my life and career. I read it in 2019 and it empowered me to ask for a long overdue raise. I was told no at first, but I didn't accept that as an answer, and I fought for it for 6 months until I got the raise. A month before everything shut down for COVID, the timing was perfect. I continued to use the tips from the book, and I have since changed jobs, and my salary has gone up $20,000 in the last 2 years. And I'm so much happier in life and work. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Oh my gosh, is that
Oh my gosh. You put that on my website. That is so fantastic.
Awesome.
Thank you.
So,
I'm very touched by that. That
well,
really.
I thought that would be good to hear, but for others who haven't read the book, this is really a great book. And what I appreciate as a scholar and a researcher is that Sally has not only taken her experience with so many people, which is a form of, focus groups and different kinds of things, but also I know that you keep up on the publications that are the scholarly research as well. And that's super important to me, right? And to doing really good best practices. So I love that. So there's so many questions, but let me make a quick comment about your, and I can't remember which number, you'll have it memorized, which habit, but I do appreciate the topic of rumination.
Yeah.
So yeah, just give me a little bit on that.
Yeah, rumination research, as you know, shows that it's much more common in women than men. And research is, not research, rumination is basically going over and over and over something usually negative that happened, to see, to kind of beat yourself up about it and give yourself a hard time. And you do this usually in the belief that if you focus on what you did wrong and spend enough time analyzing that, it will help you avoid it the next time. It doesn't actually work that way, because rumination becomes a way of feeling bad, and it's actually quite unproductive, and it can keep us stuck. It can be a tough habit to work on. And I'm going to give you 2 examples of how you can work on it if you recognize it, because, you either do this or you don't. Many of us do it. How could I have? What is that person going to think of me? Or I can't believe that after all this time, whatever it is. So the 2 examples, one's in the book and one's not, one's since the book came out. Marshall does not ruminate. Boy, there is someone who has never spent a minute beating himself up. And he and I were working in his apartment, New York, on the book. And neither of us accepted phone calls, but he got a special ring from his assistant. So I picked it up and I heard him and he was going, oh, yeah, Dr. Kim, I was supposed to call him at 2. Oh, okay, I forgot. I'll call him back. And then he hung up the phone and he just looked at me and he went, oh, well. And I knew who Dr. Kim was. He was the CEO of the World Bank. So as I was going home that night on the train, I was thinking, wow, if I had not made a call, missed a call with the CEO of the World Bank, would I be going, oh, well? No, I'd be spending the entire train up to my house, telling myself I was an idiot, I was a fraud, whatever. I'd have some ugly story about myself that I could have done something so stupid. And so I thought that was really amazing. Well, the next morning, life being what it is, I had an opportunity to learn from that because I got a text at 7 a.m. from an editor of an article that I'd written, a major profile of a very famous guy. And I'd gotten a detail wrong. It was where he was born. It was one town in Massachusetts, not another. But we didn't know where he was born. And I had to call him. Turned out he was in France. Anyway, I had to call him and correct it. It was only on the online version. It hadn't gone to the print yet. So my first impulse was to feel as if he was going to think, this woman is a complete idiot. She got a major fact wrong. And, so I was starting to go down the rabbit hole of self-recrimination. And then I suddenly remembered the, oh, well.
Oh,
so
well.
I printed out the largest font I could get on my printer on my office wall. I put, oh, well, to remind myself. And I just went, oh, well. And I called the guy and it was not a big deal. And we changed it. And I was able to short circuit probably a half an hour of giving myself a hard time over this. So I found that helpful. Now, here's the other part of the story that's not in the book. So I was doing a program out at Google, probably shouldn't say that, but it was in Mountain View right before the pandemic. It was, I think, the second last program I did. This woman comes up to me and she said, the most helpful thing in that book was, oh, well. She said, because I'm a real ruminator. She said, but the other day, she said, so what I do, and these kinds of things, reminders like your thing are really good. She said, so I have stickies all over my house and my office that say, oh, well, oh, well, oh, well, reminding me. She said, so I'm always going, oh, well, when I see the stickies. She said, the other day, my 4-year-old was carrying a big bowl of yogurt into the kitchen and she tripped and the yogurt went all over the floor. And she just looked up at me and she said, oh, well. She said, so I realized I'm raising the next generation of self-confident, self-accepting women. So rumination, we don't want to pass it on. That TV ad, pass it on, good feeling, whatever. Rumination is not something we want to pass on. It's not healthy. It's not healthy for us. It doesn't serve the world and it doesn't help us remember or get better at what we're doing. It keeps us stuck.
I like that. And it's talked about in the literature on confidence. I mean, some people think if we beat ourselves up, we'll be better and more confident, but it's actually the opposite, that when we have more self-compassion, yes. Oh, well, I'm human. I love the oh, well. Yeah. Then we move on, right? And we don't spin and we don't do all of these things, which are really just kind of a waste of time, don't you think? I mean,
sure, they're a waste of time, but they're also a negative waste of time. It's not we're wasting time, enjoying the beauty of nature or whatever, or sharing a laugh with a friend. No, we're wasting time making ourselves feel worse. How unproductive can you get?
Yeah. And I have a few questions. I'm looking at the time, so I want to get to a couple of quick overview questions, but a few people have asked, one asked, how can female college students, so I'm at a university, as you know, Utah State University, better prepare for the workforce and start building habits, but also another question on really early career women. So think about if you were speaking to that audience and maybe they couldn't take all all of the habits on at once, well, what would be your advice?
My advice is that the habits that are often most helpful for for women under, say, 24, 25, and are often most frequent are, first of all, the habits around communication,
Mhm.
minimizing and too much. So, and those happen to be the easiest habits to address in my experience. So I would look at those. I would look at building a communication style that is comfortable for you, but that is professional. I would look to see if you use body language that sort of minimizes your right to be there,
Mhm.
making yourself smaller, or if you over apologize. That's a
That's
typical
a big one.
minimizer, a big one. If you are constantly using the word I only, this will just take a moment, or I only have one thing to say, that kind of frames it as unimportant, or taking up other people's time. I would work on appearing, that I would work on the communication habits, because they are about appearing to be confident and professional. And professional is a really important word here. And I would aim more to be professional than confident, because confident is quite subjective.
Oh,
But
yeah.
aim to have a professional way of showing up in the world. And that will serve you tremendously well. And the things that can get in the way, the communication habits, I would work on those.
Oh, that's amazing. Those are so good. We didn't really take much time going into those habits. You have
Yeah.
many. Is there one habit that you want to that kind of could give some overall advice that you haven't gotten to that you think would be important to sneak in here at the end?
Yeah, I would say that habit that I mentioned earlier, building rather than leveraging relationships. This is important, and this really helps build your career. From the female advantage, I had been aware that women have great strengths in terms of building relationships. And this has become more and more of an advantage in organizations, as the capacity to build strong relationships has come to be seen as a leadership skill. Back in the 90s, it was seen as a soft skill, nothing to do with leadership. But now it's seen as a leadership skill. So I'd always wondered, why didn't women benefit more from that, since so many women are very skilled at building relationships? And it took me a while before I realized that it was partly that women tend to invest a lot of energy and love in building relationships with people, but they can be reluctant to leverage relationships, by which I mean ask for either tactical, job related, or strategic, career related help, and to ask deliberately and specifically. And when I talk to women about it, what I hear is often, well, I want people to know I really value them as friends, or I don't want people to think I am a user. But the people who are successful in organizations over time are very good at leveraging relationships, and they are also very reciprocal in leveraging relationships, so that they ask for a lot of support and help. Could you make this introduction for me? I see myself moving in this direction, but I don't know these key people, or don't have access to this information. Do you have any advice for me? So you're kind of enlisting them as an ally in your own career development. And then make clear that you are also, available for them. And I've seen more and more and more. That's really how we move forward. It's how we not only rise, but rise together, is through our generosity, and the mutually reciprocal relationships we develop. And it's not about using, it's about making ourselves and others stronger.
Oh, I love that, Sally. That's so good. I'm going to pop in one last just quick question, because we do have a number of men on this call today.
Right.
And so I see two questions about, how can men like myself better help empower women, they work with alongside, or just how can they be better allies? So what would you recommend in terms of, first of all, read the book, whether you're a man or a woman, right? It's helpful. And what would you recommend to men on the call?
Well, I do think it's very helpful for men to recognize some of these internal barriers that hold women back. And I've heard that, from the day that the book came out, that was very helpful to men, specifically in terms of women who work for them, younger women they wanted to mentor or sponsor, that they couldn't recognize quite what was holding her back in a way. Helpful for them with their wives and their daughters as well. I get that all the time. So I think having that understanding of what some of these internal barriers are is really important. But I think it's also, this idea of building these mutual and reciprocal relationships. Reach out to women in terms of leveraging and make it clear that you are available to them. What does being an ally mean? It doesn't just mean saying I'm an ally. It means, I'm here to give you tangible support, but I can benefit from your support as well. So it can be even a very small question, about, can you give me some insights into what's going on in terms of this? So I think being proactive in trying to solicit information and advice that can be helpful to you in doing your job, and showing that you're willing to do that. I just want to say, I said that thing about that seems to happen all the time still, where women will say something in a meeting and not get acknowledged for it, and then a man will. When you see, as a man, when you see that happening with a woman, say something, not something like, hey, you're stealing credit. No, of course not. You don't want to make an enemy, but say, oh, wow, that's the same point that Jennifer made. And that will win you such an unreasonable amount of credit with every single woman in the room. And it will really be a helpful action that you can take.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much for your time today, Sally. This has been great. I appreciate you doing me a favor to jump in and do this today. Thanks again to our sponsors, UEN, the John M. Huntsman School of Business, USU Extension for making this event possible, and have a wonderful, wonderful day.